Hiya, just a quick video just to have a little chat about things that I perhaps found personally unhelpful during withdrawal and things that I would think about doing very differently next time. And these are just through certain observations, through just personally for myself, what I found unhelpful and what I do differently next time. So the first thing I want to say is that I absolutely stand by withdrawal is 100% real. It happened to me, I went through it. But what I want to advocate for is still that message of hope for people. And I think when people are going through withdrawal, I think there's a lot of things that we can do to make it easier for ourselves. And that is not in any shape or form downplaying anyone's experience. But I think for me, I personally found some of the some of the forums out there were quite unhelpful for me, and it got me thinking about things that I do differently next time. So, and it was a conversation I had actually with a family member, which was really interesting. I know the guidelines now. I know that it's got to be done much slower. In that kind of way, getting smaller in the dose as I go down. I've got that guidance. But next time, what I personally won't do is get myself too heavily involved in forums, in reading a lot of negativity. And obviously I'm aware it's out there and I don't take that away from anyone else, but I don't think that helped me personally. I think it can almost perhaps prolong the suffering, I think, with some people. And I know that's possibly quite an unpopular opinion, but I certainly do agree there is a mind-body element to it. Because another thought I had was, life is going to be full of ups and downs off the medication. And if when I come off it, I'm waiting for that day where I wake up and everything is going to be completely okay and every day is going to be happy, then I realise that it's not a reality that is going to happen. And I think for me, I was kind of waiting for that kind of day where everything would just feel normal, if you like. And that day is never, to me, it's never going to come. And it's certainly never going to come if I, throughout the withdrawal and tapering, if I personally was to be heavily involved in the forum. So that's one thing that I would do really different. And I know it's an unpopular opinion. We've got great guidelines out there, and I think it's very sensible, absolutely, to follow guidelines. But the problem, how I see it, is when, and some people might find the forums very, very helpful, and that's fine. I don't think there is a kind of one size fits all in this. I think it's so individual, and I think that's one thing that I've kind of noticed, that it's so individual, and what works for one person won't work for another, and you can end up like sort of almost winding yourself up even more. I certainly did. If you're kind of ruminating and worrying about all these things. So that's one thing I do very differently. And another thing I reflected on is, and again, it's a really kind of obvious thing, is in these forums, you are going to get very distressed people. So and they're going to have their kind of perceptions, perhaps their biases or whatever. And how do we know? And it's just a question I'm asking, that is actual fact. How do we know that? We know now how to withdraw safely from these medications. I absolutely stand by. If you've been on medication for a long time, for me, it makes complete sense to do it a lot slower. In a kind of hyperbolic sense, but it is individual, and I think that element of it needs to be taken into account for me personally. And I know there's a lot of kind of cliche about that kind of message of hope, but I do absolutely stand by that. I think that's one thing that perhaps got me. I ended up reinstating a small dose of an SSRI, but I'd kind of lost hope, I think, towards the end, that nothing was ever going to get better. And I was kind of from day to day, I was sort of very very kind of heavily fixated on in certain forums, and for me now I've kind of stepped back, and I've kind of, from my own observations, I found that unhelpful, and that's kind of the sort of person I am anyway. Like, I would be more kind of, I have a tendency maybe to worry more or ruminate more. So if I was to put myself in that environment, then the psychology behind that, to me, it would just make things worse. So that's just an observation I wanted to make. And just a couple of points from a recent piece of writing that I wrote. Again, absolutely to clarify, I kind of sit kind of like kind of right in the middle, and some might say, oh, that's a very kind of safe place to be, but actually I think the truth often is kind of somewhere in the middle. So I absolutely stand by certain medications help some people, and that's absolutely fine. But then, as I said in my article, I've also seen, and I've also been very open about, that I have, people do have withdrawal, people do have adverse side effects, sometimes really quite serious ones, and that needs speaking about. So that's kind of where I sit, and not being afraid to say, question, I wasn't like this before I started a medication, so could this be the medication? So it's asking them questions. So that's kind of the stance I kind of take, and it's not to disregard it. Obviously bipolar disorder, emotional difficulties, they absolutely exist, but it depends what that person finds helpful. And I have seen, when people are on lots of different medications, they can, in some people, mimic a kind of mental illness, and it's just being really mindful of that grey area. So it's not so kind of one or the other, it's trying to stay balanced, and I think that's how people should be in withdrawal as well. You've got to kind of weigh up, if you're involved in a group or something, or a forum, and you find that really helpful, and you come away feeling really good and uplifted, and it helps you, then obviously that's great. But if you come away and you feel more hopeless or whatever, you've got to question, is that helpful? So that's one thing I personally would do different. I've got the guidelines, I've got the latest book, so I'll be following that, obviously taking into account individual differences, which is a well-known kind of psychological sort of term, that we're all different, so very much feeling and seeing how it goes, but also pulling in as well the kind of positive ways to manage withdrawal, and things that I can be like active in, and kind of pushing out the unhelpful things. So I think it's kind of it's that as well. And also recognizing that once somebody is off a medication, then perhaps old feelings of worry and anxiety will come back. So it's how somebody's going to manage that in the absence of the medication. So that's where other forms of support, I don't know, yoga, exercise, therapy, again, not for everybody, but some people might find that very helpful to kind of relearn them kind of emotions that might have been suppressed for a long time. You know, and as unpopular as this might sound, I think if you've come off the medication quite slowly, you know, safely, done it properly, and then, you know, you've got to accept that certain feelings and emotions are going to come back. And if every day you're spending reading really quite negative people's experiences, you've got to ask, is that helpful for you? Do you come away and do you feel better? And that's for you to decide. So I've rambled on enough, but just wanted to do another quick video just to give some of my thoughts on that. So thanks for watching.